Hello again, ladies and gentlemen, and welcome back to our fourth and final lecture of Unit 9. This lecture focuses on the Crusades, a series of wars during the Middle Ages aimed at expanding the Church's stronghold throughout Europe by expelling and persecuting Muslim-held countries throughout Europe and Western Asia. Please make sure that as you're going through this lection, you have your Lecture 4 worksheet and are filling in the missing information so that you can use this to help you prepare for the upcoming test, which you can expect within the next few days. So, let's get learning. The Crusades, Christian Reform, here we go. So, here we're going to talk about, obviously, the Crusades. What are, or what was, the Crusades is obviously the question that's probably going through your mind right now. Well, the Crusades were a holy war involving the journey of thousands of Europeans to reclaim the Holy Land of Jerusalem in the name of Christianity. From the time it started and until it ended, there were between 8 or 9 different crusades, depending on the source you're using to get this information. So some of them were pretty one after the other. The 4th through 9th were one after the other. Same with the 8th and 9th. So depending on your definition of how many there were or your understanding of the different battles, usually they just say it's either 8 or 9. So, continuing on. When were the Crusades? Well, the Crusades started in about 1093 when Pope Urban II called for a holy war with the goal of taking back the city of Jerusalem from Muslim tribes that it had conquered several years earlier, or several hundred years earlier. When all was said and done, it would ultimately cost tens of thousands of lives and take nearly 300 years before the wars were ultimately over. This map shows the routes taken throughout Europe and into the Muslim-controlled regions of the Byzantium Empire and that of the Turks. So as you can see with the purple arrows, it started all throughout France and Germany back then, and people would travel down through Italy, sometimes across the water, or through Germany, down Serbia into the Byzantium Empire, across and past Constantinople and into Asia Minor, down through and until they reached Jerusalem, which was their ultimate goal, conquering areas all along the way. At least that was the idea. So, church reforms and the Crusades. Why the Crusades? Well, there's a couple different reasons. Social, economic, spiritual, and political reasons. On the social level, the Crusades provided knights with a chance to stop fighting each other and start fighting a new foe. By the start of the Crusades, it was the knights that had threatened peace in Europe. Economically, the Holy Lands of Jerusalem were generally wealthier than Europe, and many wanted to share in their wealth. So, why the Crusades again? Other economic reasons existed as well. Since the younger sons did not stand to inherit their father's property upon their death, and since those riches were usually left to the eldest sons, these younger, non-inherited sons were looking for wealth and adventure elsewhere. Because of the economic hardships, this provided opportunities that a war could provide. Merchants supplied loans to finance and pay for the journey. Third reason was political. This was a chance for the Pope to gain territory instead of the Byzantine rivals possibly expanding their empire. And the final reason was spiritual. Fighting and dying on the Crusades was a ticket to heaven, which, interestingly enough, was a Christian contradiction. Spiritually, if a person fought and died in the name of God, it would give them the one-way ticket. Thanks to the decrees of the Pope, this, however, was sort of a contradiction to Christian teachings. You know the whole thing about thou shalt not kill? I guess that doesn't count if you're the Pope and they tell you otherwise. And here we have the guy who started it all, Pope Urban II. So let's take a look at what happened, at least for the First Crusades. The First Crusade started around 1096 at the suggestion of Pope Urban II. He called for a holy war against the Muslims controlling the Holy Lands. Pope Urban Pope Urban's call brought tremendous support for the Crusades all around the Holy Roman Empire and beyond. It was suggested, according to a written account some years later, that Pope Urban said, "God has conferred upon you, above all nations, great glory and arms. Accordingly, undertake this journey for the remission of your sins, with the assurance of the imperishable glory of God has conferred upon you, and above all nations, great glory and arms. Accordingly, undertake this journey for the remission of your sins, with the assurance of this glory to the kingdom of heaven." Basically, he's saying all nations should take up arms, and those that do will be doing it with God's blessings, and have their sins forgiven, and be assured a place in heaven. Sounds like a good deal. The Pope declared all that who died in this Crusades would get a ticket to heaven. Because of this, the Holy War, it only made sense that the battle cry for this endeavor be, "God wills it." Once assembled, the troops would be traveling 3,000 miles from parts of Europe and onward to Jerusalem. Finally, after the long traveling, 12,000 troops approached Jerusalem and besieged it. Finally, on July 15th, 1099, the Christians captured the city of Jerusalem. Yay! In the process, though, the Christians slaughtered all of the Muslims left in the city. Boo! So, that was the First Crusades. Sounded good, right? Well, why stop at one when we can go for two? The Muslim army, under the command of a guy named Saladin, captured Jerusalem again in 1187. Well, that sucks. The Christian Crusade to defeat Saladin and recapture the city. Not ones to just give in to Muslims taking over the holy city of Jerusalem, the Christians' crusade to defeat Saladin and recapture the city, but their efforts failed, and the city remained under the control of Saladin. Here we see historics and modern-day depictions of Saladin, the Muslim commander during the Second and Third Crusades. And of course we have Hollywood's idea of what the guy might have looked like. Nice sword he's got there. So, moving on, let's talk about the Third Crusade. Yes, the Third Crusade. Alright. The Third Crusade were different in the fact that now kings from different realms around Europe participated in the battles. Three of the most powerful monarchs would be commanding their troops into these battles. It only took 7 months away. It only took 7 months, though, before the time of Prince Philip II of France ended up going home due to part illness, but also to take care of his affairs in his country. So he started it off, won a battle, got sick, went home. He also said that he had other things he needed to take care of, so whatever. The second monarch was a guy by the name of, basically it was German Emperor Frederick I, who also joined troops on his conquest. Unfortunately, he drowned on the journey when, as a king would do, he refused to wait his turn to cross a bridge, and instead took his horse into a river, whereby the current was too strong for his horse, and the two of them toppled over. The fact that Frederick was also in full body armor and really couldn't swim also probably didn't help. Ever try swimming with 80 pounds of armor on? I wouldn't recommend it. The lesson here is, wait your turn.
It's just the way the game is played. It's best that you just wait your turn.
The Third Crusades. Again, this time we're talking about the third monarchy to take the trip, and who actually stayed there. This was the English King Richard the Lionhearted. He fought the Muslim leader Saladin in many battles. Finally, though, they agreed on a truce in 1192, whereby Jerusalem stayed under Muslim control, and in return, Saladin promised that unarmed Christians could freely visit the city's holy places. Sounds like a good deal. Nice compromise there. However, because of the ultimate failures to recapture Jerusalem during the Third Crusade, Pope Innocent III in 1198 called for another crusade to attempt to retake the Holy City once again. The problem was, countries that had previously pledged their time and support were not interested this time around. Those that did take up the call were not very well trained, nor did they have the skill that previous fighters had. Because of this, the Fourth Crusades failed to recapture Jerusalem. During the next century, during the 1200s, 4 more crusades were called up and were also unsuccessful. Christians aren't having much luck against these Muslims in the homeland, or in the Holy Land. One of these failed attempts was known as the Children's Crusade. As the story goes, a German or French boy was visited by Jesus and given instructions to find other children, travel to Muslim cities, and convert Muslims into Christians. The boy did exactly that. He rounded up different boys, mostly poor, to travel with him via boat to the Holy Lands. However, as the story goes, the boys were actually taken to Tanzania and sold into slavery. That sucks. The truth, however, seems that a boy by the name of Stephen of Cloyes, a 12-year-old, was able to convince about 30,000 adults and children to believe his story and try to get help from the king. The king basically ignored his request for help. That, however, didn't stop Stephen of Cloyes. So he, and many others who stayed with him, made several attempts to travel. In the end, however, they were not successful and ended up having to beg for food in order to survive. So, let's talk about the effects of the Crusades. First, it showed the influence and power the church had to motivate people to do its will, even if that means going to war. It ultimately allowed for trade expansion between Europe and Southwest Asia. The Crusades called upon thousands of knights and other participants to war, and that resulted in the loss of their lives. The good news, if there was any, was that those who survived were able to bring back culture to Europe, thereby expanding its understanding of the Muslim world. Once again, though, the persecution of Jews continued, and thousands were slaughtered because they were considered infidels. The failure of the later Crusades lessened the power of the Pope. This bright idea of war was coming back to kick him in the tail, that this was what God wanted. Because the knights were all dead, the Crusades weakened the power of the feudal nobility. And so began a legacy of bitterness and hatred of the Christians for the Muslims, and vice versa. The result: the Crusades were a violation of "thou shalt not kill." It was also an example of an abuse of the church's power. The effect of the Crusades are still felt throughout the region today. And with that, we are done with our final lecture 4 for Unit 9. Hope you enjoyed it and got something interesting out of this unit. If you have any questions, again, please feel free to let me know, and I'll be more than happy to give you a hand with anything you need. Please use these notes to help you prepare for your Unit 9 test, which will be coming in the coming days. So, have a great day, and make sure you stay awesome.